Many years ago, the city of Ghazni was known for its trade. At one of the crossroads in this city, every Friday, a strange scene would unfold. On this day, a wealthy man from the city would stand with a whip in his hand, loudly calling out, "Is there anyone who will strike me and wound my back? In return, I will reward them." This rich man was Yamin, who would raise his voice and beg people, saying, "For God's sake, lash this sinner's back and take gold coins in return." The people of Ghazni would look at Yamin with amazement. Though they were God-fearing folks, as they say, not all fingers are the same. So eventually, Yamin would always find someone willing to whip him in exchange for his wealth. The Sultan of Ghazni was a kind-hearted and God-fearing man. He had a habit of disguising himself and visiting the markets to observe the conditions of his people. One day, while disguised and patrolling the bazaar, he noticed a crowd gathered at a spot. As he drew closer, he was shocked to see a man being brutally whipped, his back bleeding. The Sultan asked his companion whether this man had been sentenced for a crime, and if the person whipping him was an executioner. But his companion replied, "Your Majesty, this man is Yamin. Every Friday, he comes to the market just so that someone may lash his back until he bleeds. And not only does he endure this, but he also pays a handsome sum to the one who beats him." Hearing this, the Sultan said, "If this is the case, do not let this man leave today. Bring him to my court. I want to know who this person is and why he imposes such cruelty upon himself." The next day, Yamin was presented in the Sultan's court, his back wounded and bleeding. The Sultan said, "I saw you with my own eyes being whipped in the bazaar. Now tell me, why do you do this to yourself? And why do you pay people to hurt you? Are you some kind of magician?" Yamin replied, "Your Majesty, I do not have the strength to stand in your court for long. Perhaps there is no one more unfortunate, greedy, and cruel in this world than me. I request you not to waste your precious time listening to the tale of this wretched man." But when the Sultan insisted, Yamin began his story. "Your Majesty, far from Ghazni, there is a settlement where sometimes it doesn't rain for an entire year, making farming nearly impossible. Poverty had spread its wings over that place. Everyone in that village was poor and destitute, except for one man who was immensely wealthy. It seemed as if God had opened his treasures exclusively for him. But this man was extremely cruel and greedy. He never missed a chance to rob the poor. Whenever someone was struck by misfortune, it brought him great joy." The Sultan was curious and asked, "What connection does this person have with your whipping?" Yamin replied, "Your Majesty, the connection is deep, because that cruel, greedy man is none other than me, standing before you, telling my story." He continued, "I owned a large mountain from which precious stones were extracted. Stones used to build beautiful buildings. There is hardly a palace in Ghazni that does not have stones from my mountain, including your own court, Your Majesty. All the villagers worked for me as laborers. They had no choice but to tolerate a tyrant like me to feed their families. But I had a cruel condition when paying their wages. I would inspect their backs at the end of the day, and based on that, the worker would only be paid if his back was injured and bleeding from carrying stones. In the evening, the poor laborers would line up, each lifting their shirts to show their backs. Only those with visible wounds and bleeding would receive their wages for the day. The pain in their backs would ease slightly at the thought that at least their families would have something to eat that night. My greed had taken over my mind so completely that I became a merciless tyrant. I had no shortage of wealth, and on top of that, God had blessed me with a child. It is said that when a man has children, compassion enters his heart. But even the birth of my son didn't remove the veil of cruelty from my eyes. Though my son was young, I always felt that he disapproved of my brutal ways. Because of this, I couldn't look into his eyes. So I decided to send him away to the city for education, just to avoid facing him. My son went to study at a school in the city, while I continued my oppressive ways for years. Sometimes, laborers working on the mountain would get severely injured. The Sultan and his courtiers listened intently to my tale as I continued with tears in my eyes. Among my workers was a frail and weak man who supported his wife and 2 daughters. Despite his weakness, he suffered the most under my tyranny. Because of his fragile body, he would place a cloth on his back while carrying stones, and in the evening would show me that he had worked the hardest. But I stuck to my condition. He had to show wounds. When he couldn't, I would send him home empty-handed. Once, this poor man worked for 3 consecutive days, but couldn't show a wounded back. I was secretly pleased that I was getting free labor. I denied him wages for 3 straight days and sent him away each time. He would beg me in tears to at least give him some food so his family wouldn't starve. Your Majesty, I'm sure that even if he had pleaded to a stone, it would have shattered from pity. But I remained unmoved. His wife and children had been fasting for 3 days. When he went home, his wife would ask if he had brought anything to eat, and he would reply that he couldn't meet the master's condition again. On the 4th day, when he came to collect his wage in the evening, I was furious to see his back finally wounded. I had hoped I wouldn't have to pay him again. Nevertheless, I grudgingly gave him his due. He took the money with trembling hands and set off for home. But because of extreme weakness from hunger, he couldn't make it and collapsed on the way. Death took him before he could reach his family. The next morning, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I saw a woman standing there, her cheeks sunken, lips dry, and her face as lifeless as a desert without water. Beside her stood her 2 little daughters, their eyes filled with a strange fear. This woman was the widow of the laborer I had driven to death. She raised her hands and cursed me, saying I had murdered her husband and that she would seek justice against me. After cursing me, she left. From that day, I started feeling immense mental torment. The thought kept circling in my mind that this woman would go directly to the judge and file a complaint against me. And if that happened, I was sure I'd be punished as a murderer. A few days later, there was another knock at the door. Already gripped by fear, I sent my servant to check. The servant returned and said that a messenger was at the door. I thought to myself, surely this woman has now informed the judge. So I told my servant, go and summon the messenger. And so the messenger went. Now, I became extremely anxious and terrified. My peace during the day and sleep at night were both destroyed. If I did manage to fall asleep for a little while, the widow of that laborer would appear in my dreams and say, I have lodged a complaint against you. Now be ready to face the punishment. Her words would jolt me awake every time. On the other hand, that messenger kept coming to my door, and each time I kept sending him back because I didn't want to appear before the judge. I kept thinking maybe by delaying, I could escape. But as they say, God's rod strikes silently. The respite he had given me seemed to be over, and my time of reckoning had arrived. That day, a mountain of grief fell upon me, a burden I could not bear. It was the day I was to pay for my boundless cruelty. Your Majesty, that day once again, there was a knock at my door. I thought it must be the judge's messenger again. But my servant came and told me that a man had arrived with a horse cart. I quickly opened the door and saw a man standing there with a horse cart. On that cart was a body wrapped in a shroud, from which blood was still seeping. When I lifted the cloth and saw the face, it felt as if the ground beneath my feet had given way. Your Majesty, it was none other than my own son's blood-soaked corpse. Seeing my son's dead body before my eyes, I lost my senses. I hugged his corpse and cried bitterly. When I regained some composure, I asked the man who brought the cart how my son had ended up like this. The man replied that he knew nothing. His only job was to deliver the body to me. I thought perhaps that widow had taken revenge on me by killing my son. But then I remembered that woman was herself very frail and weak. At most, she could have only complained to the judge. With a heavy heart, I buried my beloved son with my own hands. May God never show such a day to any father, where he must bury his child. Now, the only place from where I could learn the reason for my son's death was the school, which was 2 days' journey from my town. The next day, I was standing at my door, ready to set out on the journey, when suddenly the same messenger appeared. I thought, how long can I keep running from reality? I have already lost my son. So I told the messenger, give me that letter. He handed it over to me. As I narrated my story, I, Yamin, once again paused and began sobbing uncontrollably. The Sultan placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, and with great difficulty, I controlled my sobs and continued my tale. I said, Your Majesty, until now, I believed that the woman had complained about me to the judge, and this letter was a summons from him. But when I opened and read the letter, I was struck with such shock that I can't even describe it. In that letter, it was written, Dear Father, I have been very ill for some days. I have been seized by a strange disease. In the morning, blood-filled boils appear on my back, and by evening, they burst and blood flows from my body. Father, I am in unbearable pain. I want to come to you to get treatment, or you should come to me at the earliest. I hope this letter reaches you quickly and ends my wait. Your Majesty, now you can understand. That letter was from my son. That messenger kept bringing my son's message to my door for 10 days, and I, lost in my own ignorance, kept thinking it was a complaint from that woman to the judge. But now I believe that the oppressed widow did not complain to the judge, but rather to God, who is the greatest judge of all. I could have run from the Judge of Ghazni. But how could I escape the grip of the Almighty, who rules the entire universe? Now, I began to remember all my sins, one by one. The curse of that poor family destroyed me so thoroughly that I wasn't even destined to read my own son's letter in time. Your Majesty, from that day until today, I wander the streets of Ghazni as a living example of caution and warning. I had fallen into such greed and cruelty that seeing others' wounded backs used to bring me comfort and satisfaction. Seeing blood flow from the bodies of the poor and weak used to make me happy. But today, my condition is such that until I see blood flowing from my own back, I cannot find peace. Your Majesty, my story ends here. Now you tell me, am I not deserving of being whipped and wounded every day in the public square as punishment? When Yamin finished his story, silence fell over the court. Some faces were wet with tears, while others were red with anger. Then the Sultan addressed Yamin, saying, Yamin, your tale is full of lessons. You have already received punishment for the crimes you committed. Your case in the hereafter is between you and God. Therefore, by continuing to punish yourself, you are only committing more sins, because God never wants a person to oppress his own self. Now my advice to you is, For your own peace and comfort, spend the same wealth whose greed brought you to this state, on the welfare of the poor. Indeed, God is most merciful and accepts repentance. Friends, how did you find this video? Please share your thoughts in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much for watching the video.